Trump threatens China on trade, China's mysterious discovery on the moon, and a CIA agent found in Hong Kong. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. We've entered a new phase in the U.S.-China trade war. On September 1st, the first in a new round of tariffs against China went into effect. 15% on $112 billion worth of goods. That means about 2/3 of Chinese imports are now being taxed. Thankfully, that doesn't include everyone's favorite seasonal Chinese import, pumpkin spice mooncakes. Hey, it could happen. There's already a spicy chicken mooncake. It's filled with real chicken and real regret. Anyway, by December 15th, virtually all Chinese imports will be taxed when the second round of new tariffs goes into effect. That will be 15% on another $160 billion worth of imports. And President Trump is warning China things can get much worse. Even worse than spicy chicken mooncakes. But the Chinese Communist Party is playing a waiting game, hoping things will get worse for Trump instead. They hope Trump will lose the 2020 election, and someone more favorable to Beijing will be elected. Obviously, Trump is pretty confident in himself. He tweeted that when he wins re-election, a trade deal will get much tougher. Tougher than a Trump steak served well done. Meanwhile, according to the latest data, the trade gap between the U.S. and China is actually getting smaller. And both sides are now meeting again for more trade talks in October. Of course, as we've already seen, actually getting a trade deal won't be easy. And as former U.S. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis said at a recent talk at the Council on Foreign Relations, just look at Hong Kong.
And watching what's going on in Hong Kong right now, their authoritarian mode against their own people, it takes a real stretch of imagination to say they would treat foreigners better than they'd treat their own people at home.
The U.S.-China trade war isn't just about trade imbalances. In a way, it's an ideological battle between America's free market model and China's communist model. The Chinese Communist Party has used illegal trade practices, intellectual property theft, and currency manipulation to boost the Chinese economy at the expense of American workers. The most recent example, according to the Wall Street Journal, the Chinese telecom giant Huawei is being investigated over new allegations of technology theft. Huawei was accused of stealing intellectual property from multiple people and companies over several years. This is obviously really unfair. The U.S. calling out China, I mean. Obviously, that's why China is taking the U.S. to court. China has lodged its third complaint about tariffs to the World Trade Organization. It's a strange move considering how many times the U.S. has lodged complaints about China to the WTO, complaints China simply ignored. So the Chinese regime should have first-hand experience with how toothless one of those WTO complaints can be. But don't worry, the Chinese regime is taking steps to ensure you'll be seeing fewer stories about technology theft, like this one from the Wall Street Journal. No, not because they're going to stop stealing. They just banned a Wall Street Journal reporter. Much easier. Another sticking point in the trade war is actually China's drug war against the United States. President Trump has been complaining that Chinese leader Xi Jinping has not honored his agreement to block shipments of fentanyl from China. Of course, China's top drug enforcement official has said that's not true at all. In April, China said it would ban all forms of fentanyl, cutting the supply to the U.S. But they never specifically said they wouldn't ship it to Mexico and use drug cartels to smuggle it across the border. Speaking of mysterious substances turning up, China's lunar rover has apparently found a mysterious and strange shiny gel on the moon. Here's a picture of it. Wait, no, that's just the crater they say they found the mysterious gel in. They haven't actually released any photos of the gel itself yet, but they say it's there, so take their word for it. When have they ever lied? This just in, don't always take their word for it. This footage of an American man getting arrested in Hong Kong went viral. And Chinese media said he was actually a CIA commander. The initial accusation came from a single post by a Chinese netizen. Then several Chinese media outlets reported it, and then a major pro-Beijing Hong Kong television network did. It was later taken down. Just goes to show that Chinese media don't know how to spot a CIA commander, but they do know how to cover up their mistakes. So how are things in Hong Kong? After all, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam this week officially announced the pending withdrawal of the extradition bill that was the source of all the protests. And that's not all.
當然呢個要走出困局，而家擺喺眼前最重要嘅係停止暴力。
Wow, that's great. The Hong Kong government is finally going to stop police from getting violent and make sure that they follow the law. Wait, what's that, Shelley? Lam wasn't talking about the police, she was talking about the protesters. That's weird, because I think it's pretty clear that things get much more peaceful in Hong Kong when the police stop beating people in the subway. Meanwhile, Hong Kong protesters say withdrawing the extradition bill isn't enough. Actually, they were a little more graphic than that.
If you scrape your knee, applying a Band-Aid onto the wound will be a quick fix. But if you don't do that, and even start rubbing dirty fingers onto the wound, what used to be a small, easily fixable injury will morph into an infection, then rotting flesh, and eventually amputation, or even death by sepsis. If Carrie Lam had withdrawn the bill 2 months ago, that may have been a quick fix. But applying a Band-Aid months later onto rotting flesh will simply not cut it.
I think what she's saying is Carrie Lam's going to need a much bigger Band-Aid. And while students around the world are headed back to the classroom, not so in Hong Kong. Thousands of students are boycotting the first days of school. Middle school and high school students held hands and pens and umbrellas to protest the government. My first day of school was never so much fun. With the trade war and the situation in Hong Kong, things are looking pretty grim for the Chinese Communist Party. But that's okay, because all they need is a little fighting spirit, according to Xi Jinping. Because decades of relentless communist struggle has worked out so well for the people of China. October 1st is the 70th anniversary of the communist takeover of China, and state-run media are going into overdrive. They've been calling Xi the people's leader, a title previously only given to Mao. And this week, the People's Daily ran a front-page commentary criticizing some cadres, especially the young ones, for being weak-kneed and unwilling to fight. Yeah, if only they could be willing to fight, like the young people of Hong Kong. On second thought, never mind. But this will be a challenging time for Xi Jinping. During the anniversary, the Central Committee will meet for the first time in 20 months, and Xi Jinping may have a lot to answer for. But at least Xi Jinping can say he's still bringing home the bacon. Because, did you know China has emergency pork reserves? Neither did I. But with the African swine flu devastating China's pig farms, the government had to open the vaults. China consumes a lot of pork. Half of all the pigs in the world are in China. It's a crucial part of the diet, because remember, some animals are more equal than others. Of course, Chinese pork lovers might be a little better off if their government hadn't put that 25% tariff on U.S. pork. And in a move that's sure to anger the Chinese Communist Party, the U.S. and 10 ASEAN countries have begun their first joint naval exercise in the South China Sea. The U.S. said the drills will help maintain maritime security. Not from any particular threat or country, of course. Now, the drills will be held in the South China Sea, in what the U.S. considers international waters. But since China considers the whole thing to be Chinese territorial waters, things could get dicey. So long as China gets rid of those young cadres too weak-kneed and unwilling to fight, that is. And that's it for this week's China News Headlines. And now it's time for me to answer a question from one of you, a fan who supports China Uncensored with $1 or more per episode by contributing through the crowdfunding website Patreon. Ralph K. Ginorio asks, can you recommend a film documentary series that studies the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, Mao's true legacy? A wonderful question. It's really hard to find a truly comprehensive documentary about the Chinese Communist Party, but if you're interested in the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, and Mao, I'd recommend PBS's China, A Century of Revolution. The 3-part series is 6 hours, full of archival footage of a China the Chinese Communist Party would like to sweep under the rug. Let me know what you think of it. Thanks for your question. And if you have a question for me you want to hear answered on the show, sign up to join the China Uncensored 50-cent army by supporting the show with $1 or more per episode. Again, YouTube is demonetizing us so much, we would have to shut down the show if it weren't for your support. And to everyone, thanks for watching. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.